All right, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Stratis. I'm going to be your lead robot inspector at the North Star Regional this year. And later on in the presentation, Jeff Pahl is going to be joining us as well to talk about what's actually going to be happening with the robot itself and some tips and tricks you can do there. I'm going to be covering everything you need to know about the inspection process and hopefully get you guys through that process quicker and easier this year than you have had in the past. First up is bag and tag. Bag and tag was new for Minnesota teams last year, but it was only at North Star and 10,000 Lakes, not in Duluth. So if you only went to Duluth, you haven't experienced it yet. If you did both Duluth and North Star and 10,000 Lakes, or 10,000 Lakes, then you went through a different process than you're going to be going through this year. So we're going to cover the process. Basically two scenarios. Either you only go to the bag and tag regionals, or you go to bag and tag regional and then championships. Fortunately, both of these processes start out exactly the same. So if you're competing at a bag and tag regional, like any of the regionals this year, you'll get in your kit of parts 2 bags and 6 tags. These you'll be using at the very end of the build season, so make sure you put them someplace safe in your workspace, and you don't want to lose these. At the end of the build season, when we have our stop build day, instead of putting the robot into your crate, you're going to be placing it into a bag and then sealing it with one of your tags. It's just like a zip tie, you just want to pull it nice and tight. At that point, you also have to have an adult, so someone 18 years or older who's not a student on the team, fill out your lockup form. When they fill it out, make sure that they fill out every single column, otherwise the inspectors may need to check on that when you guys get to competition. And the phone number is required, it's not optional. And that's just in case the inspector has any questions that they want to call that individual to verify. And your bumpers. Last year at North Star, we had a lot of teams who did not bag their bumpers. We weren't used to doing it. And as a result, the bumpers were counted as part of their withholding allowance. Some teams, this wasn't a problem because they didn't have anything else. Other teams, this ended up being a pretty huge problem for them, as they had an extra 20 or 30 pounds worth of bumpers. So make sure that you bag your bumpers. They can be bagged in a separate bag, in which case you'll have 2 lines on your robot lockup form, one with each of the tags for your 2 bags. Now, as the Minnesota Regionals are 3-day events, you cannot open your bag prior to arriving at the competition. That robot access period does not apply to any of us. It only really applies to those teams attending the 2-day events, like in the Michigan area. And make sure you bring your lockup form with you. You'll be using the same lockup form at every competition, so don't lose it. Don't crumple it up after you're done with it at one competition. Make sure you keep it someplace safe. So if you're competing at your bag and tag and then go into championships, you're going to do everything exactly the same as leading up to your bag and tag event. The difference is going to be at the end of your last bag and tag event. You're going to bag up the bag again instead of just taking your robot home. And then in the bag, you're going to take it home and put it inside your crate. When you get to championships, you'll then be uncrating the robot and then unbagging the robot as part of the standard bag and tag procedure. So here I have a sample robot lockup form that I filled out earlier today. You'll notice that the very first line was signed on February 21st, which is our lockup date this year. And it was signed at 11:50 p.m. because I'm sure all of you are going to be working well into the night getting your robots finished. Every single line is filled out. And the important thing, it has a locked, or an L, marked on that first line. And the second line, going into the Lake Superior Regional on March 8th, the same security seal number is recorded because that was the number that was already on the bag, and an unlock was marked. That line will be filled out by your robot inspectors when you get to competition. Since this team was then going to another competition, they had to have another lock sign-up line with a new security tag. These are one-use tags, in order to lock up the robot before going to their second competition. Notice that one is on March 10th, which was the last day of the Lake Superior Regional. And then they get to North Star Regional, where a new inspector this time fills out an unlock line. And because this team made it to nationals, They then lock up the robot one last time to when they leave there on March 31st. Now, with your bags, make sure you protect them. These bags are pretty thick, but we do have robots with some sharp edges in them, so that it may take a little bit of damage. If there are any significant holes in them, we're going to be taking a very, very close look at those. So make sure you guys don't put any big holes in them. We don't want you working on your robots through the bags. Also, give some thought on how you will pick up and move the robot once it's in the bag. It's going to be very effective if you immediately put it on a robot cart so that you can then transport it around once it's all bagged up. And make sure you do not lose your lockup form. Cannot stress that one enough. Additional information, there are in Section 5 of the 2012 rules is quite a bit of information. A lot of documentation is available about this, and of course, we're always here to answer any questions you have. Moving on, your radio. When you get to competition, you're going to want to get your radio configured properly to work at the venue. This configuration is going to entail basically taking your robot up to the inspection station, plugging it into a computer, and running through a quick program. So make sure your radio is easily available, and as soon as you get there, just take it off your robot and take it up to the inspection station. You can do this while the rest of your team is putting your pit together. This way, you'll have no delays when you want to actually get out on the field for your first practice round. Your bill of materials needs to be available at 2 different times. First time is a USB flash drive that you can take up to the inspection station, and we can load onto the computers first. This way, first can use that information to help further fill out the kit parts in the future. Good times to do this are when you're configuring your radio. Since you're already going up to the inspection station, bring it with you. Also, when you're waiting in line to have your robot weighed and sized, you're going to be right by that computer as well. You also have to have the bill of materials available in your pit during inspection. This can be done either on a printout form or available on a computer that you have available in your pit. You don't want to have the inspector go back to the inspection computers to look at your bill of materials. It needs to be available in your pits. So on to the actual inspection. There are a number of different steps going through the inspection process that we're going to touch on here. The first is actually getting ready for the inspection. You want to take your bumpers off and remove your battery from your robot. But when you bring your robot up to the inspection station, make sure you bring your bumpers as well, both sets, red and blue. This includes any bumper covers you might have. This way we can get a weight of both your robot and your bumpers to ensure that your bumpers are within the allowable weight, and it lets us later weigh your robot with your bumpers on for convenience going into the elimination matches. And only bring as many people as you actually need to move the robot and bumpers around. The inspection station can get awfully crowded when you have 20 teams trying to go through inspection at the last minute. At the inspection station, you're going to start out by weighing and sizing your robot and weighing your bumpers. After you're weighed and sized, you want to just take your robot back to your pits. The inspector will either follow you straight back, or if there's a line for inspectors, because we only have so many at each regional, one will show up at a later point. Now, when you get back to your pit, you want to make sure you put your bumpers on. It doesn't matter which color, just put on the bumpers for your next match. And we're going to want to see the robot on the ground so that we can check your bumper height, which is usually a pretty strict requirement in the rules. When the inspector arrives at your pit, you want to clear out everyone who's not involved. Basically, we want to talk with the students, and only those students who actually know about the robot. Typically, you may have 3 or 4 people who know about electronics on the robot. We only really need 1 of them. You may have, different people who are experts in different subsystems. Make sure they're all available. But get your minnows out of there, get your PR team out of there, get everyone who's not going to be interacting with the inspector out of the pits so that you can have a little room to walk around the robot and check it all out. During the inspection, the inspector is going to be asking you a lot of questions. They're going to be asking you how many motors you have. They're going to be asking you how a particular mechanism works. They're going to be asking you to describe your pneumatic system. take these opportunities to show off your robot. Tell them how things work. Be proud of what you've accomplished, and the inspection is going to go a lot smoother. Now, before you bag up your robot, take a look at the inspection checklist. It's usually posted about a week before we lock everything up. So that gives you plenty of time to go through the checklist and make sure you know everything you need to know. Have mentors, parents, teachers, or whoever you can get a hold of to go through a mock inspection with you and make sure that there are going to be no surprises when you get there. You know, for example, make sure you don't have too many motors on your robot. Now, reinspection. There are really two types of reinspection. There's a voluntary reinspection, and there is the mandatory reinspection before the elimination matches. Voluntary reinspection occurs when you make a change to your robot. If you are adding on a mini bot deployment system this past year, or you're modifying something on your tube grabber, then you're going to want to come up to the inspection station and let us know that you've made some modifications. We'll send an inspector around, and that inspector will then look at that specific area that you've modified and make sure that it's safe, that it complies with the rules, and that there won't be any issues. If you're close to the weight limit, we may ask you to bring your robot back over to be reweighed, in which case you can leave your bumpers on. But generally, it's just a quick look over at the robot, and it takes really only a few minutes. So don't be afraid to ask for a reinspection. Now, reinspection before the elimination matches is mandatory for all teams. After your first qualification match, we want you to bring your robot straight back to the inspection station, and we're going to reweigh you. You'll take your battery out, but you can leave your bumpers on for this reweighing. This way we can take the weight of your bumpers plus the weight of your robot against the weight your robot currently is, and it gives us a good indication if you've changed anything and forgotten to tell us. If your weight is off from what we expect, then we're going to take a closer look, ask you what you've changed, and go over and make sure everything is still within the rules. And so that's it for the process portion. Are there any questions?
Somebody did make a comment that the bag's not sufficient protection in the back of a pickup truck. Make sure to wrap it in a tarp or something or it will shred.
Yep. You can imagine in the back of a pickup truck you get a lot of wind going through there. And if you've ever seen anyone going down the highway with a tarp hanging off the back of the truck, it just flaps all over the place and your bag will get some pretty serious holes in it. Any other questions?
I'll unmute everybody. If you have further questions, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
How long does inspection take?
Inspection will typically take anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes. Although inspectors are not shy or afraid to allow you to go off for a practice match in the middle of an inspection if you absolutely need to. We'll try to work around your schedule as best as possible.
Yeah, this is Jeff Pahl, and to elaborate on that, if we got 60 teams that all think they're going to have their robot inspected in the last hour, and it takes half an hour per team, it's going to be a problem. So keep in mind it's not a 3-minute process.
You'll also find your inspectors are much happier and energetic in the beginning of the day before they've had to sit around and wait for everyone to actually come up to be inspected.
One of the most common things that disqualify a team's robot.
That's what I'm going to talk about next.
Yep, Jeff has that portion of the presentation. He's going to be talking all about common problems we've seen on robots in the past years.
All right, I don't see any other questions. So,
right.
Jeff, if you want to share your presentation, go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and John and I will both take questions at the end of my presentation. As soon as I figure out how to do this.
For those of you out there, Jeff does not have a webcam, so we will pause the video for this session.
Yeah. Nobody really wants to see what I look like anyway, so. Well, okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we got you.
Okay. Let me see if I can make my screen here a little bigger so I can see what I'm doing, and we'll get started. Okay, just to let everybody know, I'm not watching the chat window while I'm doing the presentation, so.
I'll help you monitor that.
Okay. I don't think so. Maybe I am, because maybe I can't advance the slides with the screen this way. Give me just a second to figure out the technical issue here. It's not my classroom. So, okay, yeah, somebody just asked the common things that disqualify a team's robot, and as you can see, the presentation is 10 quick and easy ways to fail inspection and how to avoid them. So, pretty much going to cover that topic. I'm Jeff Pahl. I've been a mentor for a bunch of teams, primarily 1379, which is down in the Atlanta area, and now 2530 here in Rochester. This will be my 9th season here in First. This year I'll be the lead robot inspector at Lake Superior. Last year I was the lead robot inspector at Lake Superior and at 10,000 Lakes. So you may recognize me from there. If you've been to Championship in any of the last 3 years, I've been a division lead inspector at Championship. And there's my email address. If anybody has any questions, I'll give that again at the end. So, what are we going to talk about? We're going to discuss the most common problems we observe during robot inspection. And I always make this disclaimer at the beginning of the presentation. The rules change every year, so I tend to avoid specific numbers and that types of things. The weight limit has changed a couple of times since I've been doing this. The size limits have changed. I've been doing First since before there was a kit chassis in the kit. So when people say you always get this in the kit, I go, no you don't. So I'm just going to talk in generalities. These are all based on prior year's competitions. I haven't gotten to see this year's rules either, not that I haven't asked. So, you know, everything is subject to change January 7th, but I always start with those things. So, number one, quick and easiest way to fail inspection is weight. There is a weight limit. I think the heaviest robot I've ever seen was about 200 pounds. You're going to hear me repeat certain themes over and over during this presentation because they're very important. Weight is one of them. This is something I could spend an hour just on this part of the presentation, but one thing, if you don't take anything else away from this, is this, that you want to manage your weight from the day of kickoff, not wait until you get to the competition and think you're going to drill holes in it. So, if you want a fun exercise, sit down sometime and calculate how many quarter-inch holes you have to drill in a quarter-inch piece of aluminum to lose 1 pound, and then tell me if you think you're going to do that in the pits on Thursday afternoon at a regional. So, the best way to do this is make sure you have a weight budget. Keep track of each subsystem, keep track of the weight of each piece. The kids that are here in the room with me from my team know what a total pain in the butt I am about the weight budget. And how I continuously ask them how much does that weigh every time they show me something. Doesn't matter which 3D CAD package you're using, if you're using Inventor, if you're using Pro-E, SolidWorks, all of them let you put the density of the material that you're using in, and it will tell you how much a part weighs. So draw your part, define the material, start drilling holes in it, and figure out whether or not you can drill enough holes in it to make it weigh what you want it to do, or whether or not it's worth the effort to drill the holes in it. And I cannot emphasize this enough. People often ask me, what advice do you have for a rookie team? This is it. Buy a scale. Not a bathroom scale at Walmart. Buy a decent scale. Scrape up $200 and buy some sort of a shipping scale with about at least a 200-pound capacity 0.1 or 0.2 pound resolution, and this one's kind of important. Get one where you can read the display when you've got a robot sitting on top of it. So the biggest problem with a bathroom scale is as soon as you put the robot on top, you can't read it. So Grainger and others sell in the $150 to $200 price range some excellent portable scales. My team brings one to the competition every year. We're constantly being asked to borrow it. I know every year it seems like I end up giving people the link on where we bought it. You know, I try not to endorse any particular one, but those are the types of things to look for. Remote display is a big one. So, second way is size, because there's also a size limit. People do a little better on that than on the weight limit, but you'd be surprised. Those of you who've been to competition before know what the evil sizing box looks like. For the rookies, we have a big box. You set the robot on a platform, and the robot's got to slide in and out on the sliding platform without touching anything. In the configuration, it's going to start each match in. So if you need to wrap a bungee cord around your arm for it to fit in the box at inspection, we're going to make sure that every time you set that robot on the field, there's a bungee cord wrapped around it. So, so take that into account, and don't think, well, we'll just push it in and tie it down for the inspection or whatever. If you got to tie it down to fit in the box, it's got to be tied down when you start your matches. That catches a lot of teams. One rule of thumb I always recommend is when you're sizing your frame, go at least 1 inch less than the size. So if there's a 36-inch limit, make sure you're at least no more than 35 in your original design, maybe even 34. Because if you're going to use a 3/8 bolt through the frame as your axle, and the head's going to stick out the outside, the head height on a 3/8 bolt is about 3/8 of an inch. Times 1 on each side of the robot, and you're down to only having a 1/4 of an inch left to slide in and out of that box. And then somebody will decide they got to have a piece of plastic covering over the outside of that as part of their shielding or something, and then there's a zip tie, and then you don't fit in the box. So do not start at 36 inches or whatever the limit is. Start at least 1, if not 2 inches underneath it. So I have seen teams at the inspection station beating their robot with a hammer trying to get it to fit in the box. You don't want to be that team. When you go to check your size when you're working in the shop, don't just hold a tape measure up to the robot and look at it. You're not getting a true view of it. Visualize sliding one side of your robot up against the wall of the shop and holding a big framing square or something up to the other side at whatever point sticks out the farthest, and measure that with a tape measure. That'll give you a much more accurate picture. And then keep in mind that we can recheck the size of your robot at any time. So make sure you have a design that's not going to get bent out of shape every time it gets run into on the field, so that you're not going to fit. This is really important if you're going to more than one regional, or say you're going to both regionals and championship. We get a lot of robots at championship that are so bent up that the team has a lot of trouble trying to get them to fit back in the box. So make sure you're going to stand up to the abuse. Bumpers. I could talk for about 3 hours just about bumpers. I pretty much guarantee you're going to need bumpers this year. The bumpers have to be built to the requirements and the rules. If they're these are all subject to change, but the bumper rules have been consistent since they started having bumpers, and I do predate bumpers. Now I feel old. So this is important. It's 3/4 inch plywood. It's not whatever piece of scrap particle board the freshman you told to make the bumpers found in the corner of the shop. The rules say pool noodles. Gray foam pipe insulation is not pool noodles. Yes, I know it's Minnesota. Yes, I know it's February. Yes, I know you can't find anywhere to buy pool noodles. The veteran teams that were thinking bought them last summer. You can get them mail order. Andy Mark sells them by the case. We've had good luck in the past going to like pool supply companies that sell pool chemicals and that type of thing and getting them to dig some out of the back warehouse, that type of thing. So, but yeah, it needs to be pool noodles. In the past, the plywood has not been allowed to extend beyond the corners of the frame. Like I say, that's TBD. I've, heard some rumors that the bumper rules are going to get tweaked a little bit this year. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's possible that we might get to extend a little bit, but pay attention to the rules. Your covers need to be attached extremely well. Andy Mark sells a really nice elasticy, stretchy cover thing you can put around your robot. That is probably the #1 cause of penalties I've seen on robots the last 3 years, because it's big, it's loose, it sags down, it hangs out of the bumper zone, and the refs are going to call it as a penalty. If you're going to use a cover, instead of having 2 sets of interchangeable color bumpers, make very sure that your covers fit well. It also makes your robot look a lot nicer. The bumpers have their own weight limit. As John said, we're going to weigh the robot, then we're going to weigh the bumpers. We need the bumpers and the hardware. When you come out for inspection, bring both sets of bumpers and all the nuts and bolts that hold them on. Now the weight limit applies to each color. We'll weigh the red bumpers, and then we'll weigh the blue bumpers. So don't worry about if there's a 20-pound weight limit. Don't worry that both sets of bumpers total is 20 pounds. It's individually. And when they're attached to the robot, the bumpers must be rigidly attached to the robot. Zip ties are not rigidly attached. Duct tape is not rigidly attached. Bolts, steel pins, etc. People always ask me, what is rigidly attached? My definition of rigidly attached is, can you pick the robot up with the bumpers? If I can't pick the robot up with the bumpers, it's not rigidly attached. Because you can tell me, oh, that's not how we carry it. I've been a coach on the field. I've carried robots on and off the field. When the field crew is screaming at you to hurry up, robots get picked up by the bumpers. There's nothing worse than watching somebody pick the robot up by the bumper and all of a sudden all they're holding is a bumper. And as John said, they need to come off for sizing and weight. And as a guideline, and I copied this right out of the rules, bumpers should be removable and installable by one person in less than 10 minutes. People always seem to think that that's supposed to be funny. What I tell my team is that I think if it takes longer than 2 to 3 minutes, it's too long. There is no reason that if you need to be able to take your bumpers off, especially if you're changing them in between matches, there's no reason it should take you an hour, which I have seen. One last thing I'm going to say about bumpers, and it's because they always seem to be an afterthought. Bumpers are not something that you should stick some freshman with the last 2 days of the season to build. Bumpers should be something that are part of your design from day one. Figure out how you're going to attach them, figure out how big they're going to be, figure out what height they need to be at. They should be done and built, at least the plywood backing and the attachment brackets, basically the same time you have a rolling drivetrain. That's one reason why we say they need to be in the bag. That's not something you should be working on after ship day. They're a very visible part of the robot. They're the very outside part of the robot. If you do a lousy job on them and they look awful, your whole robot looks awful. Okay? That's not what you want to be presenting to the judges, to the inspectors. If I walk up to a robot and the bumpers are falling off and hanging loosely and everything, then I really start to question, or if they're not even built to the materials required in the rules, then I know you didn't read the rules, and then I think I've got to really go through the rest of the robot with a fine-tooth comb, because you probably didn't read the rest of it either. So I will stop. I will get off the bumper soapbox now, but like I said, those are a big problem. Okay. Sharp edges. I don't like going home from the competition covered in robot rash. Again, this is copied straight out of the rules. This has been in the rules for years. I'm not going to read it all to you, but believe me, sharp edges are a major concern for us. What this means is make sure you deburr all the cut metal edges, outside corners. Same thing for cut plastic edges. When you start hacking a hole in the side of your plastic robot cover with a Dremel tool so that you can reach in to reach the switch, make sure you clean up the sharp edges of that hole and all the melted little bits. And the biggest one is plastic cable ties that everybody rushes and cuts really quick at some jagged angle sticking out half an inch from the little knob part that holds it together. Those are extremely dangerous. Take a couple extra seconds, cut them off square and flush, or take a big flat file and file them down. Invest in a pair of side cutters that are what they call flush cutting, where the ground edge is flush with the outside edge of the part instead of beveled in. This is one of the things that we tell inspectors to pay very close attention to. You can either get them right the first time, or you can spend a bunch of hours filing them down in the pit. I'm often asked the question, what do I consider too sharp? The answer to whether or not I feel it's a sharp edge is, would you rub your face on it? Okay? If you wouldn't rub your face on it, it's sharp. Bill of materials. As John alluded to, there's a bill of materials requirement. Step one, you have to have one. You have to bring it with you, not leave it back at the hotel. New the last couple of years is we've got to get it in an electronic format on the required template from the website. It will be posted on the website along with the checklist for everything that was in the kit, etc. You need to list everything that you used in the robot, even if it came in the kit of parts. If it was in the kit, you list it and you use $0. Something like a sim motor, if there were 2 in the kit, but you were allowed to use 4, 2 line items. 1 line item, 2 sim motors, kit, $0. Next line, 2 sim motors, purchased from Andy Mark, $28 each. So even if it was donated, if you get a donation, you need to ask people. You need to ask the people donating it, what's the retail cost? What would it cost any other team to go out and buy one? That's the price you need to use. There is a dollar limit. In the past, it's been $400 for any individual item, $3,500 total for the robot. I've only ever seen one robot that had a problem with the $3,500 limit. But we do run into problems with the $400 limit. So pay attention to that. You don't need to list every nut and bolt and everything that it costs less than $1. Don't include stuff that's not part of the robot. We're happy that you bought tools. We're happy that you fed your team. We're happy that you bought a joystick for the driver's station. But they're not part of the robot. They don't go in the bill of materials. If you set your bill of materials up right, it'll list every part in your robot, and you can have a column off to the right for the weight, going back to keeping track of your weight. And, as John alluded to, these actually do get looked at. The inspectors look at them. That's why we ask that you have a copy available in the pit when we're looking at the robot. We have somebody that will be sitting at the inspector's table collecting them. That individual will be looking through them for blatant errors. And the reason it's got to be on the required template is because these all get taken back to New Hampshire, and at first headquarters, they load these all into a big database after the season is over. This is one of the things that factors into what comes in the kit of parts every year. It factors into what kinds of goodies are now available through the first choice system, etc. It's a way for first to get an idea of what teams are using. So, I see over here, I am able to see the chat. Somebody asked if you can reuse bumpers year to year. if it's a fabricated part, you cannot reuse it year to year, which means if you did anything to it other than bought it at the store, no. Yes, you can reuse COTS parts. The statement there is in error. You can reuse COTS parts if you have not done anything to them, is the rule. A COTS part is a commercial off-the-shelf part. If I go and buy a sim motor from Andy Mark, don't do anything to it other than bolt it into my robot, I can keep using it year after year. If I buy a wheel, from Andy Mark, all I do is bolt it onto the robot and use it. I can reuse that. As soon as I drill a hole in that wheel for, say, to attach a different sprocket to it, as soon as I paint the wheel, it now becomes a manufactured part because I have altered it, and now technically it is not reusable. So that's, yeah, I see. So couldn't find pool noodles, and we've reused them for 3 years running. Yeah, I'm not going to reject your robot if you reuse the same pool noodles, even if you did have to cut them down. I do recommend not reusing the plywood year after year. It gets pretty beat up over a while. What first is not anti-recycle. What the reason that we say you can't reuse a manufactured part is because all parts have to be manufactured within the 6-week build season. If I've got some part I bought 3 years ago and I spent 2 weeks machining it to reduce the weight by 85%, you don't want me to reuse that part every year. You want me to spend those 2 weeks having to machine it every year. Otherwise, I have a competitive advantage. That's the only reason we're anti-recycle. It's not anti-recycle, it's anti-competitive advantage. Hopefully I answered the person's question there. I can't say officially you can't do it, but no, we're not going to ask you if you reuse the noodles in your bumpers. I kind of recommend you do it, especially if you can't find some. That type of thing. We encourage the inspectors to use common sense. We're engineers, we're not lawyers. Okay, moving on, because I guess I do have a little while yet. Team name, team number, and sponsors. Believe it or not, this is one of the leading causes for teams to fail inspection. Okay, this is the easiest rule to understand in the rule book. Number must be on all 4 sides. Number must be 4 inches tall. Number must be 3/4 inch stroke width. It's been that way for years. This is so the announcers can identify your robot when it's moving around out on the field at high speed. The last few years, it's been required to put the number on the bumpers. My guess would be that they're going to continue with having it on the bumpers, makes it nice and easy. The rules have changed a little bit the last couple of years regarding number color and background color, so pay very careful attention to that. A couple of years ago, we had to have a lot of teams that were coloring in white backgrounds behind their numbers with red and blue Sharpies. That's about all I'm going to say on that one. This is another one. The name of your school or sponsoring organization, if you're not associated with the school, if you're a 4-H club or something, and your primary sponsors are required to be on at least 2 sides of the robot. 2 sides does not mean just the back. They don't have to be, they've never been required to be on opposing sides, it just says 2 sides. These are the people that paid for the robot. You should be proud of your sponsors. You need to give them the appropriate credit. That's one of the things they beat into NASCAR drivers' heads is, give your sponsors credit. And we will reject you, and you will be off trying to find them and make them out of paper and print them out and tape them onto the robot. You will not compete without them. It's been in the last couple of years, we've gone back and forth in terms of whether or not you're allowed to practice on Thursday without the sponsor names and numbers. I think Some years they've required it even to go on the field to practice. Some years you've been able to not have them until Friday. Moving on to electrical. Make sure your battery is extremely securely fastened in place, even when the robot is tips over. Because I've seen it happen before, and trust me, you don't want a 12-pound lead brick bouncing around inside your robot while your robot is on its side. Bad things happen. So, make sure you use the appropriate size and color wires per the rules. It's very nice that your sponsor gave you 3,000 feet of fluorescent purple wire and it's your team color, but it's not legal. Okay? So pay attention. There's nothing more frustrating than having to tell a team that they need to get a bunch of black and red Sharpies and color all the white wire. Okay, this one has been a problem the last couple of years. Only use the allowed motors from this year's kit of parts. If you could see me, I'm jumping up and down, waving my arms. Okay? You only use the number allowed by the rules. Only use this year's. We had a lot of problems last year at competitions. I saw Globe motors. Globe motors haven't been in the kit for a couple of years. Vandor motors haven't been in the kit for a couple of years. That's not to say they won't show up again this year, but they haven't been for a couple of years. Previous year's Fisher-Price motors might look the same to the untrained eye, but each year it seems like we get a different part number Fisher-Price motor. Same thing with the window motors. We had a lot of problems last year with previous year's window motors showing up on robots. There were no metal housing window motors in last year's kit. So when I walk up to your robot and that's the first thing I see, we have a problem. Yes, and this is a real problem when at the competition I'm telling you that you've got to dismantle a mechanism that is built around a particular motor because the motor is not legal. We really don't want to be there. That's really hard for us to fix on Thursday. What I highly recommend to teams, and that's one advantage of being a rookie, you don't have any motors laying around. But if you're a veteran team, what we like to do is go through our shop a couple days before kickoff, take every motor we can find, put them in a box, and lock them up. Okay? And then if somebody wants to prototype something and needs a previous year's window motor or something, they have to come get it from a mentor, and we can keep track of where that motor is. If you just got them laying around from 3 or 4 years worth, I guarantee you the wrong motors will end up on the robot. The other thing is, make sure you only use kit motors. Don't go down, to Axeman or something and pick up a motor and say, hey, cool, let's put this on the robot, because it's not legal. So I'm going to move on now unless there's any particular questions about that issue. But that was a major, major problem for us last year at all the regionals.
One tip to add here, Jeff. What my team does when we pull the motors out of the kit parts, we have a Sharpie standing there with us, and we write the year number on the motor itself. I make sure that if we're in the build space putting a motor on the robot, you see that the motor says 2011. Oh, we can't use that one. We have to go find the one that says 2012.
That's an excellent idea. We do that also, or if somebody comes and gets a motor from me out of the illegal motor box, it either gets spray painted or gets written on it in big letters. But yeah, that's a big one to watch out for. We probably had 5 or 6 teams last year at the 2 regionals that I was the lead for that had illegal motors on them. And it's just really depressing. Okay, a question was asked, do we need to buy motors from Andy Mark of the same size and type if we want additional motors, as long as it doesn't go over the total number? No, you don't have to buy them from Andy Mark. They're one of the people that sells them. Like last year, we were allowed to have 4 Bainbot motors. Well, if you want Bainbot motors, you need to buy them from Bainbot. Sim motors are available from AndyMark. They're available from vexrobotics.com. I'm not sure of any place else that you can buy a sim off the top of my head, but I know that they're available from more than one place. So, no, you don't have to buy them from AndyMark, but they've got to be the right part number. A lot of your websites that sell these things will have a section that says, you know, first FRC legal motor. Just because the website says it's FRC legal doesn't mean it's FRC legal. Double check the part numbers against what's specified in the rules. Because we will look at Bainbot motors, if you got like those on your robot, we will read the part numbers and double check them. And that's another thing too, if you're going to bury motors in your robot, try to have some proof to us that you know, if you purchase them, that they are the legal and correct motors. So, moving on to the electrical system, this is a big one. The electrical system must be isolated from the robot frame. I'll walk up to people and say, your robot's going to fail inspection from 5 feet away, and they go, well, how can you tell? Well, because your camera is screwed down directly to a piece of metal. The little metal insert that's in the back of the camera is electrically connected to the ground return on the circuit board. Same thing, the C-RIO, because it's a piece of industrial equipment, the chassis is common to the power return. Therefore, they must be mounted with a non-conductive material between them and the robot frame. And what we do at inspection is we take a standard ohm meter, we touch it to the black terminal on the battery cable, we touch it to the red terminal on the battery cable, and touch the other end to the frame and measure resistance. The reason for this, I get asked this all the time, you know, because people say, well, cars don't do it that way. Why can't we use the frame as return? It's what they call double insulated. If the frame is isolated and you have one fault somewhere in the robot, one wire, you know, rubs through, motor wire rubs through because you ran it through a hole that's too tight or something. Now, all of a sudden, you know, the frame is not isolated anymore. But in order for it to be a problem, another wire's got to rub through, so it requires two faults. If the frame is tied to the battery return, tied to ground, then you're only allowed one more wire to wear through. That's the reason for the requirement. I also strongly recommend that you label your circuit breakers so you know what they do. Wire your labels as much as possible. Because when we look at one of your students and say, walk us through the electrical system, and they look at the giant ball of spaghetti that you have turned your wiring system into, because I guarantee you, you'll do a beautiful job of making sure everything's neat and tidy and accessible, right? We always do. But another thing to keep in mind is that giant ball of wire that you didn't have time to cut to roughly the right length is weight. You know, the typical robot has several pounds of wire in it. People don't believe me on that, but it does add up. So the next thing that we run into problems with all the time is the orange blinky light. We run into two problems. One is the requirement that we be able to see it, and the other one is you don't hook it up right. I'm assuming we're going to get the same light again this year. We've had it the last couple of years. It's a 3-terminal light, and you need to connect it as shown in the drawing. And then I went ahead and copied out what the different blinky patterns mean, just because it's actually kind of helpful to know. Although the blinky patterns are subject to change every year based on updates to the system firmware. But this is just a big one. Make sure you got a jumper wire between the two outside terminals. Or if you don't do that, it'll blink all the time. It'll never stop blinking. The field will come looking for me and tell me your light doesn't work right, and you know that they want it fixed. I guarantee you the FTAs, a lot of the FTAs use the light when they're trying to keep the field moving and figure out why robots aren't working or aren't connecting. I absolutely guarantee you, if you come to 10,000 Lakes this year, because I know who the FTA is going to be, and your blinky light doesn't work right, the lead robot inspector is going to hear about it, and you will have somebody in your pit helping you fix it. Pneumatics. Improper operation of the air compressor is another one of the most common problems we run into. You get a pressure sensor switch in the kit. You're supposed to wire the pressure sensor to the C-Rio digital sidecar, not just in line with the compressor. Every year I see at least one where it's just wired in line with the compressor. The C-Rio must control the compressor through software using a spike relay. This is so that when the field disables your robot, the compressor is disabled. We don't want it to sit out there and continue running if we need to try to shut your robot off because we got a problem, especially if the problem is due to some sort of a pneumatic failure and you got hoses flailing around or something. The other reason you can't wire the switch in series, because I get asked this question every year, is if you pull the data sheet for the switch, it's about a 3 or 4 amp switch. I think maybe it may be rated for 5 amps. The compressor pulls about 25 amps at startup. Yeah, the switch works. It'll work for a little while, wired in line. It will not work that way for long. You need to set the software up so that the compressor shuts off at less than 125 psi. If the compressor shuts off when the switch opens and closes, you should be just fine. The spike relay that you use to control the compressor is the only place where you can pull the little yellow fuse out and replace it with a 20 amp circuit breaker. We tell the inspectors to check this. Sometimes it gets missed. I know of an instance last year where it probably very possibly cost a team a regional championship. The reason for this is because that compressor pulls about 25 amps at startup. It's a 20 amp slow blow fuse. You can get about 16 to 18 matches before that fuse reaches the point where it finally says, I'm tired of being abused this way. You figure it out, 16 to 18 matches puts you, about 3:30 on Saturday afternoon. That is not when you want to find out that you no longer have any pneumatics in your robot. So we try to get all the inspectors to check this. It does get missed, but you can go ahead and do that. The other thing we run into is teams that replace all the spike fuses with 20 amp breakers, and you can't do that, only on the compressor. And it's only because of the high current draw, and that's mostly related to the older kit compressor. The little compressor that came last year in the rookie kits does not draw as much current, but you can still do the replacement. I'm going to say, don't use it more than whatever the number and type of pressure storage tanks are that are allowed in the rules. Previous years, there have been 2 tanks, 4 tanks. Last year, it was basically whatever amount of storage you could bolt on your robot and stay within the weight limit. I don't know if they'll go back to a defined limit this year or not. But make sure you read the rules and see if there is a limit. Don't just assume because there was no limit last year that there's no limit this year. The other thing that I'm not sure about right now is last year a lot of teams started using plastic storage tanks. Andy Mark is now selling the plastic storage tanks in a kit that they sell. Keep in mind that Andy Mark sells a lot of stuff to people who build robots for applications other than FIRST. Not necessarily everything on their website is FIRST legal. Those white plastic tanks may or may not be legal this year. I've heard some noise that there might be something. Or there might be some sort of a rule, and I'm just basing this on speculation. I don't know anything that says that if you use a plastic tank, it must be protected. Because we saw them on robots last year where they were out on parts of the robot that were getting hit by other robots and stuff, and it became a safety concern. So, like I say, I don't know anything. If they're legal this year, I would not discourage their use. They're lighter than the aluminum ones. They're cheap. Just pay attention to if there are any rules that say if and how they can be used. Goes back to the whole, just because it was legal last year doesn't mean it's legal this year discussion. Yeah, well, that's just the whole pneumatics thing, but pressure relief valve that comes in the kit of parts must be directly attached to the compressor, not through a piece of hose, rigidly attached to the compressor. You need to set it to the appropriate pressure. And we do check that by shorting out your pressure switch and seeing where it goes to. Usually there's directions posted with it. If you're not sure how to do it, send me an email, send John an email, contact a veteran team around you that knows how to do it. You have to have an easily accessible vent valve, and that vent valve needs to drop the entire pneumatic system to atmospheric pressure. It needs to be upstream of your first regulator. And all pneumatic components must meet the minimum pressure rating given in the rules, which typically in the past has been 125 psi. If you're using pneumatic parts that did not come in the kit, you must have manufacturer's documentation for those parts, or they must be clearly stamped by the manufacturer with a pressure rating. Expect to be asked for documentation at inspection for anything you bought that's not in the kit. Air cylinders, pressure tanks, tubing. That's one to watch out for, is if you buy tubing, a lot of tubing doesn't come with a pressure marking on it. Be prepared to show me a receipt that says you bought 100 feet of type X tubing and the manufacturer's published data sheet for tubing type X. That type of thing. One thing I didn't really go into in this presentation regarding pneumatics, but which always also is an issue, is there will be more than one regulator probably in the kit of parts. Pay attention to the pneumatics diagrams that are published by first on the website after kickoff. If you've got two regulators in the kit, one of them needs to be the primary regulator, which is the first regulator after your high pressure system. And then you can, use the numbers from previous years. You're allowed 120 psi in the storage tanks. You're allowed 60 psi working pressure in the cylinders. So you have a regulator that steps it down to 60 psi. Then maybe you decide that 60 psi is too much for one of your mechanisms, so you put another regulator on there that drops it down to 20. The regulator that drops it down to 20 has to be fed by the 60 psi regulator, not directly from the high pressure side. The reason there's two different regulators in the kit, and the reason it matters which one is used as the primary regulator, is that one of the regulators is a more expensive type that is known as a pressure relieving regulator, which means if it's set for 60 psi and you have it connected to a cylinder that's connected to your arm, and another robot runs into your arm and pushes on that cylinder, that's going to attempt to raise the pressure in the cylinder above 60 psi. A pressure relieving regulator will vent, so that there's no way that you can drive that working pressure side of your system higher than that 60 psi. This is a safety issue. Otherwise, if you didn't have the relieving regulator, you could conceivably drive pressures in excess of 200 psi if you had a big cylinder with a big arm on it and you hit the wall with it, another robot hit you, etc. So this is why the type of regulator matters. I don't know what color or type they'll look like this year. Just please pay attention to the rules and understand that there is a reason that we actually care which regulator you used where. We're not just trying to be a pain. All of the pneumatics rules typically are very safety driven. There's a high risk of things going wrong and hurting people with pneumatics. That's one of the reasons why they've opened it up last year to where you could buy any actuator cylinder you wanted below a certain size. You're still not allowed to make your own cylinders. Okay, it needs to be a commercially manufactured cylinder. I know there's teams out there that have the capability to make cylinders, but there's a lot of teams out there that would may come out of PVC pipe, and we'd end up with bombs out on the field. So, and pneumatics are sacred. You cannot machine on a pneumatic cylinder. Don't paint them, don't polish them, don't grind on them, etc. Because you could, I'm not a structural engineer. I'm not going to make a judgment at a competition as to whether or not what you did to it jeopardizes the structural integrity of the cylinder. We make it easy. Don't modify them. If you modify them, they're not legal. End of discussion. So, and moving on, maybe, to item number 10, firmware versions. So even if you got a new serial this year, the odds are it's shipped from National Instruments prior to somebody making a firmware update. So pay attention to the team updates that come out through the course of the season. In case there is a statement in one that says you need to update to a current version. You want to do this before you ship, because if you end up doing the update at the competition, because we tell you can't connect to the field because you didn't update it from what it shipped from NI in October, you'll have to load all the new libraries on your computer. You'll have to recompile. You'll have to redeploy. It tends to take about an hour. You're wasting practice match time, or you're missing matches. So pay attention to that. And another one is, if you do decide to use CAN with the Jaguar speed controllers, then we end up checking the firmware version of the speed controllers to make sure that that is also what the latest version is. So if you're using CAN, then you understand enough about the system to understand where to go to get the firmware and how to make sure you have the latest version. So I'm not going to go into any details. So in summary, as John said, first we'll release the inspection checklist prior to stop work day. It usually comes out sometime week 5 when we're sure that FIRST has stopped changing the rules. Please use it to pre-inspect your robot. This is the same form that we're going to use at the competition to inspect your robot. So it'll tell you exactly what things we're going to look for. As John said, during the inspection, we're only going to talk to students. We throw all the mentors out of the pit. So make sure that the team members that know the answers to the questions are available when you come up for inspection. There's nothing more frustrating than the entire team going to lunch except for one kid who was told to go get the robot inspected, and when they drag you over to the robot, you find out that they were the website developer. Make sure you got the right people there that can answer the questions. We're going to ask you to walk us through the electrical system, walk us through the pneumatic system, explain the motors to us, explain your mechanical system to us. Make sure you got somebody there that knows how to make the controls work, because we're going to need to power the robot up. Try to keep this in mind, please. The inspectors are there to help. The inspectors are all volunteers. They are taking time off work and donating their time to be there to inspect. If your robot has a problem, they're going to work with you to get it fixed, or try to hook you up with another team that can help you get it fixed. When I tell you that something's illegal on your robot, I'm already thinking about different ways you can try to make it legal and get it working. So don't panic, just do that. But please help us out by not waiting until dinner time to all get in line for inspection. We may have 10 to 15 inspectors, but they're going to eat dinner too. So at dinner time there may only be 4 or 5 of us there. You don't want to get the one inspector who didn't get to eat dinner, because they tend to be kind of cranky by about 7 o'clock. As John said, a proper inspection is going to take 30 to 45 minutes. So don't think you're going to get in line at 10 minutes to 8 Thursday night and get your inspection knocked out and get your sticker on the robot before they close the pits at 8 o'clock. So if you disagree with what the inspector tells you, please very politely ask to get a second opinion from the lead robot inspector. The inspectors at the competition get a couple hours of training at the event. We try to get them some materials beforehand, but they're all volunteers. Typically they're members of a team, but they don't know every last detail. They may not be a pneumatics expert, or some complex mechanical mechanism. So please keep gracious professionalism in mind. Please do not argue with our inspectors. Please treat them very nicely, and please, they will not be offended if you ask for a second opinion from the lead robot inspector. The lead inspectors get more training than the other inspectors do. John and I both have the privilege of having to go to New Hampshire in January, because it's the only place they could find that would be colder than Minnesota, to spend a weekend at lead inspector training. But that said, if the lead robot inspector tells you something is not legal, it's not legal. There's nobody else in the building to overrule that decision. And we've had situations in the past where we've had people from North Star come over and try to find the lead inspector at 10,000 Lakes to see if they would say something was legal that they were told was not legal at North Star. Don't do that. We all know each other. We all have each other's cell phone numbers, okay? We get together and talk after everybody leaves Thursday evening. So, if John tells you something's not legal over at North Star, don't come over looking for a second opinion, because we're going to tell you the same thing at 10,000 Lakes. And if we tell you something's not legal, please don't go looking for Mark Lawrence or looking for the FTA, etc., because we've already talked to the FTA, or we've already talked to the chief inspector for FIRST, or we've already talked to Bill Miller, okay, before we tell you to do something drastically bad to your robot. Going back to the first point, though, please do ask to get a second opinion from the lead robot inspector. Several years ago, this is how I ended up being an inspector. My team was told that we had to rewire a robot by an inspector. We went off, rewired it, never did get it to work right after that. And about 2 hours into the rewiring, the lead inspector came over and apologized to me and told me that the inspector was wrong and that we should have tracked him down and asked him before we undertook that huge project. So that was the point where I decided I would get involved in the process. So please do ask. Please do keep in mind that our decisions are final, but also understand we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure your robot passes inspection before your first match. I pretty much speak for the entire inspection team at all the regionals when I say we take it personally when teams miss matches. We don't like that. We are not there to make this difficult. We are not there to make your life miserable. We are there to make sure your robot is safe. We are there to make sure that it's a level playing field for all the teams. And we're also there to make sure that you have a very fun and inspirational experience. Missing matches is not inspirational. We want to get everybody on the field for every single match. So please try to help you to achieve that. Any questions? Any time in the season, whether you're going to my regional, whether you're going to John's regional, whether you're going to the other John's regional, you can feel free to send me an email, like I say, at Jeff@Team2530. As one of the championship lead inspectors, I'm actually one of the people that will be conducting the lead inspector training out in New Hampshire. So I have if I don't know the answer to a question, then I should know the answer to the question, and I know where to get the answer to the question. So do not hesitate to shoot me emails. I believe that is my last slide. John and I will now open it up for any additional questions. Looks like we've got at least 20 minutes or so left if anybody wants to have a discussion about anything. Oh, I have a question here in the room.
So if you have a part lying around in the shop that would be legal, and you used on your robot, how would you document that as the bill of materials?
If you have a part laying around in your shop, that would be legal because, you bought it last year, never used it or whatever, how do you document on that on the bill of materials? The same way you would document it if you bought it this year, Andy marked super shifter transmission and listed it whatever it would cost me to go buy it this year. Or if it's no longer available, I guess listed at what the last price was that it was for sale at. That's how you would do that. Are the covers for the bumpers included in the kit? No. I can answer that real easily. No. At least they never have been in the past. So, that's not to say it won't show up in the kit this year, but I wouldn't hold your breath. We do recommend using a fairly robust material. The bumpers are the part of the robot that is subject to what FIRST refers to as vigorous robot-to-robot interaction. Another thing to mention in terms of bumpers and putting numbers on bumpers, one thing my team has tried in the past is we've made iron-on bumper numbers, and they tend to get rubbed off. If you're going to do that, you probably need to sew around the outside edges of them, etc. Same thing, trying to make bumper numbers out of white electrical tape at the competition because you didn't bother to think about it in advance. The first time you put the robot out on the field and it rubs against another robot, you're going to peel all that tape off, and then the refs are going to come to me and complain, and you're going to have to fix it with something else, but they're not going to let you back on the field. Any more questions? I don't know, Chris, if you want to go ahead and open up the microphones.
It is open. You can unmute yourself to answer any questions that you might have.
Can everybody still hear me okay? I've got a message on my screen that says I'm causing poor audio quality.
You are fine.
Okay.
Talk about my robot pass in Duluth and now inspected in
Oh.
Minneapolis.
Yeah. If I had $1 for every time I've heard, but it passed at such and such regional, especially when we get to St. Louis, I could probably fund my own team. I really don't care that your robot passed at Duluth, even though I'm going to be the lead inspector at Duluth. Like I say, we've got 15 volunteers that are going to get a couple hours of training. Things get missed. Or just because it's got a sticker on it from Duluth when you get up to Minneapolis doesn't mean you didn't do something to it, Saturday morning at Duluth that now makes it illegal. So whether or not you passed at a previous regional has absolutely no bearing on the inspection currently in process. Well, come on, I know there's got to be some questions. I wasn't that boring.
Saying you did a really good job and you answered all their questions.
Well, this is the third year I've given this presentation, so I am starting to get somewhat good at it. I'm trying to think of what other things. I had more time this year than I had in the past. I've had to, compress it in the past, so I'm trying to think of what other things I would throw in here. I guess the biggest thing